Hey guys, Shane here, so welcome to this figure painting tutorial, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at painting a US Navy serviceman and a German Goliath remote mine. So this very unique little scene here is based on a very famous photo just taken immediately after the D-Day landings on, I believe, Utah Beach. So we're going to begin by just painting in some of the main colours for this miniature. So I'm going to start off with his undershirt, which is just barely visible through his collar, and we're just going to take some Vallejo model colour olive drab, tint it down with just a little bit of water, and I'm just being careful not to get it on his skin. I've already pre-painted the flesh on this model, and I have a dedicated skin painting tutorial on my channel, so I'll have a link in the video description to that video. So moving on to the main part of his uniform, which is his workman dungarees, if you like. We're going to be just taking some model colour German camo beige, a small amount of olive drab, and a drop or two of Russian uniform. And we're going to mix them up on my wet palette. And I'm looking for like a slightly greeny beige colour. I don't want to be too bright, but I don't want to be too dark either. So I'm going to keep most of the colour German camo beige with just a small amount of olive drab and a little bit of Russian uniform just to give it that slight kind of greenish tinge. And I'm going to start applying this with a number 3 brush, and I'm after just adding a drop or two of water just to help it flow a bit better on the surface of the model. So with the overall space coated, we're going to start working on his jacket, and for this we're going to take some German field grey, a small amount of olive drab, and again a small amount of Russian uniform. And I'm being very careful now not to get this on any areas I don't want, because I just don't want to be going back and forth and trying to correct mistakes, especially if I get some overspray or paint onto areas I don't want. So this is actually a pretty simple little miniature to paint up, and if I haven't mentioned before, this miniature is from KT Miniatures, I believe, KS. I'll put it up on the screen where what company made this. I've only chanced upon this online and just thought it was a very kind of characterful little miniature. So this actually would be a fairly good beginner model because there's not that many colours, and there's only 2 main shades, and that's like his HBT jacket, which is basically like a herringbone weave jacket that would have been very common around 1944, and then his workman overalls or dungarees that you see both, in this case would be US Navy issue, but also you'd see them in the armoured divisions as well. So for his M1 helmet, I'm just going to take some standard olive drab again from model colour, and I'm just going to paint that in. Some people use different colours. I actually prefer using olive drab for the helmets. I think it works quite well because they are quite a dark colour, and we are going to use a few stippling actions later on just to add a little bit of depth and interest to his helmet. So for his gaiters, we're just going to use some model color Russian uniform mixed with a bit of khaki. Again, just to create kind of a greeny khaki color. Now, I'm not going to go too crazy with this because you're not going to see any of his boots or the lower part of his legs once he's sitting inside the Goliath. So we're just going to give some basic painting and wash work and really focus on the rest of the figure. So for his boots, I'm just using model color flat brown. This is a fantastic kind of deep leather kind of brown color. I actually quite like it. I use it a lot for my rifle stocks as well. And I've just thinned this down with a little bit of water. And I'm just going to be very careful in painting this in, not to get it up onto his gaiters, because again, when you're using a lot of mixes, even though I have a wet palette outside the frame here, I kind of don't like having to go back and forth, because each time you mix it up, it's going to be a little bit different. So I try to kind of, especially when I'm just doing the base colors, to kind of keep everything as neat as possible. So with the base colours all allowed to dry, it's time to add our wash, and we're going to use, as always, we're going to use Citadel Agrath Earthshade. And I'm going to lay this down quite heavy. I'm going to apply it to everything. So I'm going to apply it to his helmet, his jacket, his overalls, the boots, the gaiters, everything. Just being careful not to get onto his skin, because it can leave some weird residue on flesh, I found. So just being careful there, just to not accidentally put it anywhere we don't want. Now the thing to bear in mind is when we're applying our wash is, you can see me, I'm laying this down very heavy, because I want to ensure that I get a lot of contrast. But I'm being very careful at the same time to go back and wipe off my brush and go back and start blending this wash to ensure that it doesn't pool in places I don't want to, otherwise we're going to get big tide marks. So by just being a little bit diligent at this step, we can undo a lot of hard work to undo any damage if we go in a bit too heavy with the wash. I also kind of prefer using washes rather than the classic methods of actually painting in shadows and highlights. One, just because I don't have the greatest brush control in the world, and two, it helps me kind of define where details are, because it immediately highlights things for me. Okay, so I'm going to take some German uniform from model color, and I'm going to take a really wrecked brush and I'm going to start stippling this color. I have tinted down with quite a bit of water, and I'm just going to stipple it in a very random motion on the helmet. And that's going to create kind of some depth and interest and a bit of wear on top of the helmet. So now we're going back in to highlight our overalls, and we're going to just go back to our German camo beige and a little bit of Russian uniform. I've dropped the olive drab from the mixture. I want this to be a little bit lighter. So the Russian uniform was going to give us our green hue to the beige, and we don't really need it to be any darker. If you wanted to create more shadows or more contrast, or you felt you had to go in and recut in the shadow, add a bit more drab into that mix. Now there's a lot of big surfaces on this model, especially with his dungarees or his overalls, so I'm keeping my paint relatively thin. As you can see, it's quite transparent, so I'm going to slowly build up these colours, otherwise we're going to start getting brush marks, and we really want to avoid that. So it's just slowly building up the layers. You do one layer, then work on another part of the miniature and come back to that area once it's kind of dry. Now the weather's quite good here in Ireland at the moment, so these acrylic paints are drying nice and quick. It's one of the nice things about using Vallejo, they will dry if it's reasonably warm outside. So I don't have to wait too long to go back and add another layer without fear of pulling the paint or any crazy things happening to the surface of the model. And I'm really just focusing this highlight on the top two creases. So the wash does is, once we apply it and dries, basically turns the base coat into the shadow layer for our model. So we're having to go back in with the original colour to re-establish the same colour, just focusing it on the tops of creases and leaving the wash in the recesses. So what we're doing now is we're actually creating our middle tone, or our mid-tone. So it does require having to go back and revisit most of the work we did before. However, it's a very quick and simple way to achieving your shadows on your figure, as well as giving you a place to start with your highlights. So you can keep seeing me holding the figure into the light at different angles, and really what I'm trying to find out is what part of the model is reflecting the light, and that's where I'm going to add a highlight. Some people use the 12 o'clock or the high noon shadow where the sun's directly above the figure, and that works quite well for most miniatures too. I tend to use a bit of both, and if I'm ever in doubt where to add a highlight, I will just literally hold it under the light and just like change the angles a little bit and to see where the light catches, and then I'll actually paint that highlight in then. So now we're taking our German beige and Russian uniform, and now we're going to mix a little bit of sunny skin tone into that mixture, and this is going to be our warmest highlight. And I'm going to start really focusing this on the tops of creases and maybe some of the other areas that have the most raised detail. I don't want to go too crazy with this colour because I don't want to make it too light. But I'm going to really just focus on the very tops of creases and folds, and some areas I just want to draw attention to. So like the top of the overalls, for example, and the tops of the shoulder straps and what have you. So I'm also making sure my paint is quite thin here as well, because it just gives the paint a slight transparent quality to it, and it just helps with those transitions between the highs and low colours. It just makes it a little less stark, so I just make sure I put a drop or two of water into this highlight mixture before I start applying it to the model. So there is a lot of back and forth with the overalls because they are the main aspect of his uniform. So I am going back to ensure that I make this the most visually eye-catching of his uniform, if you like. Now I'm going to start adding the highlights to his tunic. So we're going to take our field grey, we're also going to take some khaki, and we're also going to take a little bit of drab just to mix into it. So the HBT tunics are quite dark, and I don't want to lose that depth of colour. So I'm going to be very careful highlighting these. I don't make it too light, and it's very easy to do that, especially when you're dealing with a very deep or dark colour. If you go too high with the highlights, you actually just lose the entire colour range in the first place. So I'm just going to kind of keep the highlights on his tunic quite subdued, and I'm just going to really focus these into nothing but the creases. And I'm after switching down now to a number 2 brush. All my brushes are Winsor & Newton Cottmans. So I'm just picking out again the tops of these creases, any area where there's a lot of flat surfaces on the fabric, so basically there will be no shadow. And I'm just slowly taking my time. Again, it does take a little bit of time working with such kind of monotone colours just to build up a highlight to make them interesting. But it's just back and forth, do one part of the uniform, then do another sleeve, and just keep changing the parts. Don't try to work on one part or do it all in once, otherwise you'll overwork the model and just undo your work. So to add the final highlights to his tunic, we're just going to mix in a little bit of Sunny skin tone into our mix. Again, that's one of the beautiful things of using a wet palette. You can just add colours into your mixtures as you go. And I'll be very careful with this. I'm going to focus really just on the tops of creases and nowhere else. I don't want to lose too much of that deep kind of colour of his tunic. So I'm focusing a lot of effort onto the tops of his sleeves. I want to draw a lot of attention to them. So to paint the control box for the Goliath, we're going to just take some model colour German camo ochre. I kind of find it a nice colour for doing some German equipment. It's not quite a Dunkelgelb shade, to be fair. It is a little bit more warmer, but I do find it does paint up quite nice and helps draw a bit of attention. I didn't want to use a paler, perhaps a little bit more accurate colour, for the simple fact being is I felt it would blend too much into his overalls, and I didn't really want that. Again, just thin this down with a little bit of water and just build it up over a layer or two, and then you get a very nice end result with these colours. So we're going to just take a little bit of model colour khaki, and we're just going to paint the chin strap of his helmet. Again, sorry for the weird angle, I just had to ensure I could see what I was doing. Because the interesting thing when I'm making these tutorials, the model is about 1.5 feet away from me. So there's times I have to kind of pull in close so I can see what I'm doing myself. So it's a very awkward way to paint, but you do kind of get used to it. But you know, I'd rather you guys be able to see what I'm doing than kind of and just have to deal with kind of squinting from a little bit further away than I would normally do. So now just add a very basic highlight to his undershirt, and that's going to take some olive drab and sunny skin tone. I'm going to mix it together. I'm just going to punch that into the center of his undershirt there, just to add a bit of interest. And then I'm going to take some German camo beige and just add a very basic highlight to the chin strap. Just add some wear and tear to the helmet. We're just going to take some model colour aluminium, and we're just going to very carefully edge this colour around the rim of his helmet. If you ever look at photographs of M1 helmets, it's always around like the lip and the rim of the helmet that always seems to get worn back to the actual steel. So just add a little bit of wear and tear to the control box. We're just going to take some Citadel Earthshade, or Aggressor Shade should we say. can almost do like a streaking wash with it really. Now the color, the paint wasn't fully dried, so it starts reacting a little bit with the wash. So I just kind of left it alone and allowed it to dry off screen a little bit more. So sometimes that's the big thing with using washes. Make sure that your paint is fully dry before you start applying them, or you'll just get absolutely nailed. So now just to protect our model, we're just going to take some Vallejo premium matte varnish, and I'm just going to give it a quick coat on the airbrush just to knock back any of the shine from the washes and what have you. So now moving on to the Goliath, I've basically pre-shaded this model with a mixture of deck brown and dark yellow to create this really deep sandy brown, which is going to be our base colour for the Dunkelgelb. Now I'm coming in at this moment just with straight the deck brown, just to add some more shadow, because I found that I lost some of the shade really. I didn't think it was dark enough with the original colour. And now we're going to make up a mixture of FX60 dark yellow and FX59 desert yellow, and we're going to start slowly building this colour up. So this is actually a fantastic little model to work on. I really actually enjoyed working on this project full stop. It's been one of the most enjoyable and unique figures I've done so far. And this is Tamiya's recent enough release of their Goliath, and it's a fantastic little model. The KT or KS model, which is the resin figure, does come with a replacement top plate for the Goliath, so you can sit your Navy driver on top of it. So that's going to put in a basic highlight here, just using straight up XF79. Again, being careful not to completely overdo it. I'm really just going to focus this colour into the centre of panels. So just to blend everything in together, I'm just going to very heavily thin down some Tamiya clear yellow and apply a basic filter with the airbrush just to blend all these different tones together. So to do the tracks, I'm going to take some Vallejo German Camo Black Brown and just very carefully start painting in these tracks. So I didn't go too crazy weathering up the tracks, as these Goliaths were basically a one-use vehicle. They were basically packed full of explosives, so they weren't driven around that much, so therefore their tracks wouldn't really oxidize or get worn down as much as, say, a Panzer would with their track use. So just to add a little bit of visual interest, I'm going to start taking some artist oils. In this case, I'm going to take some ochre, some blue, and some white oils, and just start adding some basic filters. So just put a few spots down, and then take a brush that's been moistened with white spirits and kind of blend it into the paintwork, and just pick a different color for different panels. Now I probably put a bit too much oil down in places, but it's not too bad. You can just keep going back with a clean brush that's been moistened in white spirits and just keep blending it back until it's barely noticeable. So So I'm going to start adding a basic pin wash with my go-to 502 Shadow Brown. This is one of my favourite colours in oils, and this is from the 502 Octai long range from AK. So I'm just going to put this into all the various different recessed details and some of the rivets and bolt heads, just to add a bit of interest, and also just to help frame these details, as this is actually, for such a small little miniature, there's so much detail packed into this. Again, Tamiya did a fantastic job when they released this kit. So you can see I'm being quite messy with the wash, but that's not a problem with oils. Once it dries, you can come back with paper napkin or just Q-tips with a little bit of white spirit on it and just wipe away anything you don't want. Oils are probably the most forgiving of mediums that a model can have in his arsenal. So just add a bit of wear and tear to the tracks. We're just going to take a HB pencil, which is a soft graphite pencil. You can buy it at any stationery shop. It's not really anything special. And I'm just going to start catching the tops of the tracks here. Just add a little bit of a metallic sheen. You could do this with a silver acrylic pencil if you wanted this to be more pronounced. But I found with the HB pencil, even though it's not the most brightest of metallic shines, it does make a look. Again, these things weren't heavily used, so there would be a bit of a shine, but not like this really bright kind of steel look, if you get me. So just going to start adding some basic scratches. I'm going to start using a 00 brush here, fine tip brush, and I'm going to take some model color Iraqi sand, and I'm going to start adding some basic chips and scratches. I don't want to go too crazy scratching this, so I'll probably go a bit too heavy in places. But my logic here is that these US Navy men that are basically the shore party on Utah Beach are basically have been just messing around with this Goliath for the last couple of days, and they don't obviously know what they're doing, so they don't care if they crash into stuff, which I'm sure they did. That's of course after the engineers are taking out the explosives, so they would get a little bit banged up just because the lads don't care, because they don't have to pay for it if they break it. I'm just laying down the first layer of chips with our Iraqi sand, which really contrasts really nicely to the oil weathering we've done, but then again it's not too stark either, and I'm just using a nice point brush for this. And then just for a little bit deeper chipping, we're just going to use some German Camo Black Brown. And I'm only going to put it down here in a few places. I don't want to kind of go too crazy, especially on the top of the Goliath. So I'm just going to focus on some of the more sharper edges. So I do go a bit heavy chipping here on this corner, but I do find it's not too bad, and it does make sense too of the servicemen that have been taking joyrides on this Goliath have been colliding into things, so there's at least some grounding and logic for why this would be a bit banged up on the edges, but it's up to you how far you want to go with it. So with the chipping out of the way, it's time to mount up our Goliath and our figure. And I'm going to be using a plinth from Hydra Models. These are fantastic wooden plinths. So I'm just going to use a little bit of liquid CA glue, being very careful not to make any marks. And I'm just going to mount it. I'm just mounting it at a slight angle to make it interesting, and then a small amount of CA glue to affix our rider to his Goliath. So guys, I really hope you enjoyed this. It's been a fantastic little project for me to work on. I really enjoyed every moment of it. And I want to say a big thank you to my Patreons, and especially whose support allowed me to purchase both the Goliath and the rider. So big thank you to you all, my friends. Your support has been amazing. I can't do it without all of you. So thank you so much, and happy watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye bye.